Okay. So from some discussions that took place before our sitting, it seemed like chapter 6 was helping to illuminate chapter 5, which, as we'll recall from last week, was causing some challenges for people, understandably so. So I'm glad to hear that, and I'll try to also be mindful of making that connection between these two chapters. And to begin, I wanted to just look at the first uh, couple of lines of the Song of Dharma Nature, and then the line that we're looking at tonight. So, and actually the beginning with the line we looked at last week too, combining that with tonight's line. So the first two lines, when we first started studying this book, talked about Dharma nature. It begins, Dharma nature is all-pervading harmony without duality. All dharmas are unmoving, fundamentally peaceful. So now we drop down to the fifth line, and that says true nature. Remember, we had Dharma nature, we have true nature. So those are being pulled directly from this poem. And line 5 and 6 speak to this true nature. True nature is so very profound, minutely subtle, not attached to self-nature. It arises dependent on conditions. So that's what we're going to be looking at tonight. Last week we looked at true nature is so very profound, minutely subtle. So that introduced us to this distinction between true nature and Dharma nature, which was where people were getting hung up. And now that we've kind of crossed that bridge, we're going to be looking more deeply into this true nature, which is further elaborated on in the sixth line. Its primary attribute, attributes being listed here, not attached to self-nature, and it arises dependent on conditions. So this is what we need to understand about true nature, that it's not self-nature, and it arises dependent on conditions, always. So it kind of harkens back to the original Buddhist teachings about, because of this, that occurs. Everything has this nature of causation. That's pointing to the true nature of things. And that's what we're going to be looking at tonight. So in this chapter, Ben spends some time talking about how this applies to things like feelings and emotions. And that's a good way to approach it because of it not being attached to self-nature. And self-nature is made up of things like feelings, emotions. So we're kind of looking at it from that perspective. And feelings, Ben says, come from a vast array of conditions if we look closely at them. And we come to understand and see how certain prompts cause certain feelings to arise. Like another aspect of the discussion before we started was some mention about some executive orders that were issued, and that elicited the obvious feelings that came up, dependent upon conditions and causes. So those are causes that kind of kick right in. And the reality is, of course, that this vast array of conditions. So it's not a linear progression. Behind behind the executive order and the effect it has on me is a whole array of other causes and conditions stretching through time. So it's way more intricate than just this leads to that. The true nature of it, because that's what we're looking at here, true nature. The true nature is just this extensive network of causes and conditions that we could never totally understand because we couldn't even see it. We couldn't depict it all. Much of it, I suspect, we couldn't even bring up into our conscious awareness. It would remain at a subconscious level or below that even. So feelings coming from a vast array of conditions is simply trying to signify that this important aspect of our own being, a single aspect, just looking at feelings, is so involved with interdependencies. So if we need really only look at one aspect, and then we can immediately kind of infer from that, oh my gosh, if I extrapolate into all of these other aspects of my being, I am so interwoven. Where could there be? Where would I find self nature? And it's a web that's constantly, it's not a fixed web. It's an energetic web. So it's not set, just as we aren't. Constantly moving. And yet, Ben lays out how getting started, and I'm sure many of us can understand this from personal experience, that we come into the practice wanting to kind of gain more control. So therefore, we're trying to exert control over something. And that generally doesn't work to good effect, as we all know, because of the nature of feelings and emotions and other aspects of our being. That it's not to say that we can't work with them. It's simply saying, and here my time at Whitehaven certainly helps drive this point home for me, that it's ongoing. It's truly a practice. If you could control something, you could finally, it's kind of like dog obedience school for your pet, right? I want to control my dog, so you train it, and now you can control it. If we could do that with ourselves, wow. And you'd think, well, send them to Whitehaven for 3 months, 6 months, But a lot of the people that leave end up relapsing because it's ongoing practice. You can't control it. You practice with it. That's the whole deal. So, the people at Whitehaven are there to help them learn how to practice with it. But it's so important that they come to understand that when they leave there, their real practice now begins in an uncontrolled environment. The one measure of control that they try to exercise is just over the environment, not allowing, alcohol and drugs on the premises. Anybody that does that, that's immediate grounds for discharge. You're gone. So very important to understand that what's really being described here by Ben is the primacy of practice. And in a similar light, our practice isn't like going to dog obedience school where suddenly, you're enlightened. Okay, now you're trained. Now you're done. You've mastered it. You can do all the tricks, all the enlightened person tricks that you're supposed to be able to do after that training course. Doesn't work that way. It's ongoing, continuous practice. Never ends. Never ends. Nothing to hold on to. And nobody to hold on to it anyway. There's the rub. Even if there was something to hold on to, who's going to hold on to it? Certainly not me or you, because we don't have any self-nature, no fixed nature. So I can't hold on to it. So Ben comments about how our lack of inherent nature, which we share with all beings, so our universal lack of inherent nature due to dependence on something else, is identical to the completeness of real emptiness. So the completeness, it's kind of a nice way of seeing this, I think, especially when we take emptiness and replace it with the Kaz Tanahashi translation for shunyata of boundlessness. So the completeness of boundlessness. I love that because they don't, on the surface, they don't seem to fit. If it's boundless, how can it ever be completed, right? But yet it's always complete. Even though it's boundless, it's always boundless, but in its boundlessness, it's always complete in this moment. That's why in each moment, there's nothing lacking, nothing missing. It's all present in this moment, in this place, being time, Uji. That's where reality is taking place, is unfolding. It's the nature of its unfolding is boundless. So it's not complete in the sense of being fixed. Kind of like in education, my education is complete. There are no more courses to take, exams to pass, so on and so forth. This is speaking about the completeness of just this moment. So the complete, thorough practice that's called for in that scenario, but that we have to bring that continuously because that's what reality is bringing to us continuously. And I thought Ben did a wonderful job of talking about the nature of sensations and how they are just in this constant state of change. He says there is never a return of particular sensations. So then I scribbled down snowflake effect. Each snowflake is unique. And so that's true of our sensations. But when we first hear that, we kind of have a more elongated sense of sensations. Like, well, yeah, but my sensation is kind of long lasting. And Ben points out, no, that's not the case at all. Actually, it's so fleeting that you can't even speaking of it is just filled with fabrications. You're stretching it out. But the reality is, it's just this moment right now, and that sensation is just kind of like a vibrating energy that's, the wavelength is varying. So it lasts about as long as each wave length. That's about the length of it. So kind of like the blink of an eye. And he goes on and makes a statement, they do not last even for an instant. So we patch it into something further through our memory, so we can include past and our projections and anticipations, putting it into the future. But those are just the things we glom onto it to kind of create something a little more substantial. But that raw sensation, as Ben puts it, doesn't last even for an instant. Just in case you're of a predisposition to hold on to your sensations, this is a good teaching to help break you of that. With a little understanding can go a long way. And of course, the same is true of things like emotions. And he makes another important point that they belong to the universe. When we have an emotional response, it's really not to see it. It's not my response. It's the universe's response. So, because it's the universe that's kind of creating that response, that emotion. And by that, kind of goes back to what I was saying in connection with our sensations. All the causes and conditions. Going back to, from my birth and even before. My parents' lifetimes, their parents' lifetimes, our society's lifetimes. So what our society's propagating now? What kind of tsunami waves are we putting forth out there for future generations? So the response, the emotion, is it belongs to the universe. And that's appropriate because it's affecting the universe. It's arising from the universe and what's happening. And it's reflective of that and being carried forward so that we can respond not only now in the moment, but on a going forward basis. Very important. So to be able to see things from this perspective of vastness, not in a limited way, it's just this emotion to this particular thing. To always be able to create that space around it so we can have a deeper understanding of what's really all entailed here, to the degree that we can have, a greater understanding. As I suggested earlier, again, it's so vast and intricate that we can't understand the whole thing, but we don't need to. The important thing is that we understand the fact that it does, through interdependence, it does have those threads that run very broadly and very deeply. And we need to be very clear on that so that things like fields like ecology, which study the interdependence of things, are looking at it from just that standpoint. What led to current conditions, and trace it back and make comparisons between our era and previous eras, and then to be able to look out into the future. I mean, ecology is just such a beautiful, perfect scientific example of interdependence. It's like the science of Huayan. We're more leaning towards the spirituality of it, but to my mind, Huayan it transcends that duality of spirituality and science. It encompasses all of those approaches. So that's why I'll continue to bring the scientific piece into this. I know last week I opened up with a quote from Laura Popek's book Strata on geology. And somehow I forgot to grab her book and bring it in tonight. Because lo and behold, a week later, after I find the quote I shared with you last week, all of a sudden she goes Buddhist on me. Just a couple of lines. But this just doesn't surprise me. She literally does start giving clear expression to Buddhist views with the proper terminology and everything. So I'll have that next week, or in 2 weeks. But it just kind of goes to show that non-duality that people are coming to recognize more and more, at least with reference to Buddhism on the spiritual side. I'm not going to say science is just going all spiritual, but they are finding, and I'm speaking from a lot of experience, reading a lot of articles and books from the scientific arena, that it just no shock at all anymore that they are acknowledging the similarity between where they're coming from and where Buddhism comes from. It's just really amazing. So I don't know if Laura has a practice, but she certainly has an understanding of Buddhist thought. So coming back to this notion of of practice that I got us to so far in terms of how do we work with our conditioning. Uh, uh, early on, and I hinted at this or spoke briefly about it within the past week or two, about how early on the purpose of practice was to break the chain of conditioned arising, as in the 12-fold chain of dependent co-arising, where in the early Buddhist practice, that's the wheel of life and death, and begins with birth and desire and clinging, and leads to dukkha and death, and the cycle continues. So all of those links were just various causes in the chain. And practice was seen as just working to break those. So, in terms of practice from the Mahayana standpoint, it's not in that kind of a linear fashion. Uh, the Prajnaparamita literature opens us to the boundlessness of this dependent nature. That's what the emptiness teachings do. Emptiness, boundlessness, synonymous terms. So Prajnaparamita, like the Heart Sutra, is speaking to the boundless nature of the dependent causation. So they would not, you won't see lists, you won't see, 12-fold chain. Rather, you will simply come to understand the timelessness and the depth of these causal links. And the importance of mindfulness carries forward from those earliest teachings, which is why, Thich Nhat Hanh's teachings are firmly rooted in things like the Satipatthana Sutra, the four foundations of mindfulness, the old Theravadan text. However, they are carried forward into our current era of being mindfully aware of current conditions and seeing them in this boundless way, which enables us then to be able to apply them to our lives right now. Mindfulness is still the vital gateway to being able to do that. But it's being applied in a different way. So when we practice, it needs to be with full awareness and openness. The openness is just as important as the awareness, because otherwise we're still in our limited view. And we only see what our causes and conditions allow us to. So if we want to be able to go beyond those, we need to be able to broaden our view by letting go, ways, fixed ways of responding to things, of seeing things, opening ourselves to other perspectives. That doesn't mean that we need to change our perspective. But to be able to have that perspective that I currently hold really have deeper meaning for me, and to be open to changing it, because I'll need to if it's really part of my practice, because everything else is changing. So I need to be able to change too. So this practice of openness, of seeing things differently, is a big, big deal. to really be able to do that. And just kind of a sidebar, but it's a point that Ben makes, and I think it's worth reminding ourselves of. He says, because things arise entirely dependent on other things, they are empty of separateness. Because they arise dependent on other things, they're empty of separateness. And being empty of separateness also entails being empty of self nature, not separate, no separation. So we can approach that from the things we're separate from in our mind's eye, or we can approach it by dropping off self. Either side is sufficient because the other one falls with its partner. So, one of the powerful aspects of this teaching of true nature, of other dependence, is no separation. We are dependent upon all these other things. So I can't be separate from it. And if I was separate from it and I had a self nature, then I couldn't change. I'd be my nature. Whatever my genetic code translated into in terms of traits, qualities, when I popped into the world, that's me. That's it. Nothing's going to change. So coming to the last points here that I wanted to finish up my talk this evening on. One important point looking ahead to Saturday in our Protecting Democracy forum that so many of us are going to be attending. I'd like to go over with you a comment near the end of this chapter that's made by Ben. He says that Huayan focuses on helping us see interdependence. The interdependent system we live in can move us to compassionate action, seeing our dependence and the fact that others are in turn dependent upon us. It's always a two-way street. We are dependent, but then others are also dependent upon us. So that speaks to me about what I will call the inherent liberal bias of Mahayana Buddhism. And I really do see it that way. I think there's a reason why practitioners who are not kind of progressive are very few and far between. I mean, it's kind of can seem kind of odd, but I think it just kind of naturally flows with this understanding of the nature of reality, of interdependence. That compassion, we talk about it as the flip side of wisdom. So wisdom is understanding the true nature of reality. And it's like, I mean, so that statement about wisdom and compassion is basically saying, if you understand how reality is, then compassion will come forth. And you will act accordingly. the inherent bias line, I'm stealing from Stephen Colbert. I don't know if any of you remember, this is going back like about 20 years now, when George W., the worst president ever until now, he was in office, and they still at that time had the press correspondence annual roast, and they made the big mistake of having him host that. And if you've never seen it, go in on YouTube and pull it up. You will crack up totally, and you'll even feel a little tinge of compassion for George W. But one of Colbert's lines was the inherent liberal bias of reality. And that's what Ben and I are talking about here, is that there is that inherent bias, I'll call it, in terms of, because the other side of the political spectrum is built around sense of self and the glorification of the self. So if that's the way you see reality, it is going to lead in a direction that maybe points more towards the teachings of Ayn Rand that we've mentioned previously. So different worldviews call forth different responses. So that's, And then the last thing, forget this teacher, Miazong, who was a great nun 1,000 years ago. This great nun, Miazong, does not invite us to figure out whether this moment is something good or not, nor where it came from, nor why it's here. It's here. Everything you want to grasp disappears moment to moment. What is your offering? The 4 words. That's where I wanted to end this. What is your offering? This is our practice. It's ongoing. So literally, it's like going through each day, and that's the question. What are my offerings as I look to go through the day? And it's not like I can, maybe in a couple of instances, I might have things kind of on my calendar. But for the most part, it's really just going out into the world and not knowing what my offering will be, because I don't know what situation I'm going into. But just that, having that as the mindset. What is my offering? So that we're ready. That's the way of the Bodhisattva. So that's Shantideva in a nutshell. What is your offering? So I'll bow out and open it up for your thoughts and questions. Brannigan?
I have one question.
Mm-hmm.
In the very last paragraph, this is from Ben, and when he said, he's talking about being grateful for everyone that came before you, but then he says, without them and their passing, there is no now for us. I didn't understand that.
Well, I think just in death, My take on that, I remember reading it because I can usually remember last paragraphs pretty good, especially if they're short ones. But in death, the whole world is born, this connection between death and birth. So if we weren't dying, there wouldn't be any fresh birth and space for that. We'd have all these ancient, but they'd still be alive. Like I heard there were some comments before we started about I forget where it came from, but it had to do with lifespans. And I think it came from out of the elderly people in the waiting rooms and stuff, and, the treatments that we can do to prolong life. And the most powerful people on this planet are seeing very long lifespans ahead of them, of at least 150. And I even saw a comment, which, I mean, it wasn't coming from some social media source. It was a respected newspaper or magazine, that in the conversations between Putin and Xi Jinping, there was a comment made about, oh, well, we'll live to be 150. And I know the titans of Silicon Valley look at that in a very similar way. So I think the powers of the planet currently see this matter of death in that light. Death will become something for the unprivileged and the powerful. So it'll become a matter of class.
Yeah, but still, no now for us. If these others hadn't died before us, no now for us.
Yeah, upon dying, we're kind of making room for others, rather than just have this. If we really think about it, imagine it, what it would be like if there was no death and you just have this accumulation that keeps accumulating and accumulating.
But that's a certain kind of death, because really there's no birth and there's no death.
Well, that's a different, the metaphor, and it's just a metaphor. But I've always seen this metaphor as being helpful about the fact that things die in order. I mean, like population studies in biology, there has to be a thinning out just of the population, or you can't provide for the next generation. They will starve. We're already near that in terms of our couple of generations that are on this planet simultaneously. If we doubled that and brought in a few more generations, because they are doubling their lifespan, how could we sustain, and how more quickly would the planet, we talk about 2100 as being the magical year. The magical year would all of a sudden become 2040, probably. It would be right around the corner. So I think if we really look at it, here's where science can help from that scientific view. If you didn't have populations dying out, that it wouldn't be sustainable. It's just a basic aspect of reality. So,
Thank you.
okay. So, but let's look at this paragraph. In death, the whole world is born. Myriad beings have died. And let us be grateful for their life and their death. Right? Because they're both important. Without them and their passing, there is no now for us. This is interdependence. Their life and their death, we're dependent upon them. This moment is dependent upon them. And to see that.
So that's really referencing interdependency.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
That I understand. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Yeah. And then, and again, this sense of gratitude, we just talked about how compassion arises because of it, but so does gratitude comes forth.
Mhm.
So both gratitude and compassion. Okay, John?
Just I mean, what we were talking about, so you live 150 years,
Mm-hmm.
you're still going to die.
Right.
And 150 years in terms of geologic or cosmic time
Oh, yeah. Very
is
true.
insignificant.
Right. But for a lot of people, that would be seen as.
Well, it depends on whether it's my time or your time.
That certainly has a big bearing. But there's also that sense of, well, but if you can get to 150, who knows by then what the technology will be. So that's not a fixed point. You just want to keep extending it out. If that's your objective, is to have more and more and more. Which,
logically right now, what we understand is that that's probably as far as we get, but we'll see what happens.
yeah, who knows? But it makes sense to me that it's an appropriate approach for people who are accustomed to needing more and more and more. So the oligarchs in Silicon Valley and the political rulers of the great superpowers, they're the people you would expect. It's kind of in their nature to be so driven, to always accumulating more. And that more translates into more years, more lifespan. So, hey, yeah.
When you go out into the world asking, what can I offer? And you go out into the world like that as like your constant state, like how do you act instantly when the opportunity to give an offering arises?
Yeah. And I would say first off, it's not so much that you're necessarily kind of hanging out the sign that I'm here to offer. What would you like? It's more in terms of our interactions with people, just having that be where our internal gyroscope is set to orient us in our interdependencies with people is how can I be of service? How can I be helpful? So that's something that we can carry around privately, although among people that really know you, that's going to be pretty clear. So we don't have to verbalize it and explicitly state it. And for people that don't know you, then that's okay. because we're not trying to, build ourselves up. It's not, this is where letting go of self-nature becomes clear, because we're not trying to puff up self by being of service to others, because that's possible too, very possible. So to just do it, kind of like Jesus teaching about praying, that don't make a big public spectacle out of your prayers. Just keep it simple. Keep it simple, subdued. And I think the offerings work a lot better that way. Because, I find that, the really person to person is so much more impactful. I mean, one can certainly donate generous amounts of money and do things that way. I'm not knocking that. I mean, I do some of that myself, but the real heart of offering, I think, is yourself and in your interactions with others. So how you do that then, because it all kind of circles back to these topics we've been talking about, openness, so that we can see what the needs are, rather than coming in with our kind of fixed view that we kind of will know. We know a couple of things about you, kind of like the checklist evaluations that we're used to in our society now. Those in the medical arena are very familiar with those. Just check off these boxes and you've got the whole thing. But to really, this harkens back just within medicine to the days when you'd actually have a lengthy conversation with the provider. And they'd have a pretty good sense about what all's going on. So I think that's key, is just the way we relate with others. And then, the opportunities for offering, for service, they'll become pretty clear. And it'll be more intuitive than, checking your list of boxes and then Googling to see. Of course, now with AI, no mystery to it at all. Okay.
He talks about this very thing when he quotes it's at the bottom of page 58, when he quotes the biologist, the biologist. Our work and our joy is to pass along the gift and to trust that what we put out into the universe will always come back. What we are doing in each moment creates the conditions for what will be.
Yeah.
And it's a gift of pure love that has no expectations for reciprocity. And it could even be a gift of non-gift, like a non-action.
Yeah.
Like in your interactions with people, and this happens all the time, someone cuts you off in traffic, or someone is rude at a grocery store or whatever. Your gift could be right speech, right action, by not reacting, by not contributing to that chain of karma in a negative way. So, and look at it again, it arises dependently on what the conditions are.
Right.
So to be open to seeing that and to be able to react accordingly is.
Yeah, sometimes silence would be a terrible reaction to things. But other times you're exactly right. That's the kindest thing we could offer. Yeah, no, thanks for pulling that up. That's the paragraph where he also mentions Robin Wall Kimmer, somebody I also find so often referenced. Maybe one of these years we'll get around to using her text as our study text.
I use her right now to train my hearing again.
Hmm,
So I listen to her on Audible.
cool.
She's amazing.
She is.
She's
Yeah.
like a scientist, Buddhist.
Yeah. Except she's not a Buddhist. She's Native American in terms of her
Yeah.
spirituality. But where's the duality in that?
It's the same. It seems
Yeah.
the same.
In terms of being able to give expression to that spirituality, she's just, whoa, the most effective person out there now, to my mind.
Mhm.
All right, so we're good. So last page, Ego Sattva vows. I vow to myself and to each of you to commit myself daily to the healing of our world and the welfare of all beings, to live on earth more lightly and less violently in the food, products, and energy I consume, to draw strength and guidance from the living earth, the ancestors, the future generations, and my brothers and sisters of all species, to support others in our work for the world, and to ask for help when I need it, to pursue a daily practice that clarifies my mind, strengthens my heart, and supports me in observing these vows. I guess we can pick up in the Zendo then, since we won't be here Saturday.
We're not going to use that.
Okay, so we have to hold up the chairs.
Yeah, we'll put, yeah, it's all right. We can get it right.
Wait.